Welcome. I'm glad you're all here. I'm Jim Milligan. I'm chairman of the Concord Historical Society. Some people confuse that with the New Hampshire Historical Society. They are far bigger, beautiful building, and I can't tell you enough good things about them. So if you get a chance to go into the New Hampshire Historical Society, right behind the State House, be sure to do that. And while I'm on a roll, go into the front of the State House, and there's a little visitor center there, and there are people who will take you on a tour through through the State House. And one of them is my good friend, Nick Wallner, by the way. Nick used to be with AAA here in Concord. But I digress considerably. Again, welcome. This is special tonight. John Porter has been around town for quite a while, and a friend for a long time. And he's put together a special program for us about Concord agriculture. But if you have any other questions about barns or agriculture, he's the guy to answer those questions, and take advantage of that while you're here. I got another crazy thing. I'm handing out little stickers that are called Concord Hysterical Society. And that's because we do have a lot of fun. And here. And by the way, they're very difficult to pull off here. Oh, hi, you all set? Would you share one? We put these together for the downtown Chamber of Commerce 3 days of, I just forgot what it's called today. What is the 3 things in downtown Concord?
In town.
Old-fashioned market days.
Oh, yeah.
And years ago, it had other names. It started 50 years ago. But anyways, we were there and we were handing these out. So, and well, what I did is I put it on here just for fun. But yeah, I had to get off. But I got one on my towel actually on the buffer. I don't think I'll take up too much of John's time, although I see he's got a milk bottle here. And I'm kind of, over the years, I've been kind of collecting milk bottles too, John. I haven't told you that. But I'd like to know who has a nice big collection, see if we can get them all together. Maybe we can have one for every dairy in Concord. That would be kind of fun. Well, that's it for me. Bathroom back there. Let's get started. John Porter, I'll let him introduce himself. And as I look around, I think half of you know who he is already. So let's welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I sort of fell into the dairy industry as a kid. I grew up on a dairy farm up in Lebanon, and then went to UNH and majored in animal science. I went to Cornell and majored in animal nutrition, and spent my career in New Hampshire as a dairy specialist. I've been retired for about 18 years. My wife kind of grins when I say that, but I have. And then after that, I wrote the book about preserving old barns, and I do that through the Humanities Council. But tonight, they asked me specifically about the history of Concord's agriculture, and I'll have to admit, I based it pretty heavily on the research I did for Concord's history book, Cross Currents of Change. And Jim Milligan was involved in that, and John Milne, who has passed away, he was very instrumental and did a lot of work with me on editing. And if any of you remember Polly Johnson, she was a sprightly little 90-year-old lady that was on the Historical Society, and I understand she was pushing for this book to get done. She was nervous that she wouldn't see it in her lifetime, but she did. And I guess on the committee, I heard that she had said, if you guys are going to do a history book, there needs to be an agricultural chapter, and John Porter needs to write it. So I think...
As a matter of fact, she did say that. And I had a chance to go to her 103rd birthday party. And she passed away shortly thereafter. But that lady was a hot ticket.
So Polly Johnson kind of got me into this, and we put a lot of work into this. And if you have a chance to get this book, a lot of good people worked and they put a lot of effort into it.
We have it on sale right here tonight, special deal.
Well, they asked me how I was going to start in this, and I said, well, in the beginning, we're going to go back a ways, but it's hard to imagine farming starting in Concord and people living in Concord and basically just these farms scattered around the countryside, just however the path was, kind of wore the roads. I always enjoy what Jim Spain does in the Concord Monitor. He has a nice history of Concord. But if we go back to the early agriculture in Concord, it was really subsistence agriculture. They were just doing the very basics to grow the food for their families. Every May, I have a little station up to Carter Hill Orchard. We have a school to farm day. And all the fourth graders from Concord come and the surrounding area. And I'll ask them, I said, why are we dealing with agriculture today, and why was that so important in our history? And they'll say, well, the farmers cleared the forest, and they mowed the fields. And finally, somebody will say, they supplied the food. Because it's hard to imagine, not having, big box stores to go to get your food. And if the year wasn't good, and there were poor yields in the crops, people were hungry. And I'm sure they shared food too. Especially some of the winter storage crops like potatoes and squash and things like that. But that was basically survival based on your farming and what you would produce, and that would depend how your winter might go. Now, most of these early farms had 5 or 6 milking cows and probably a workhorse, a few chickens, a few pigs. And in Concord, some of the early places, one is the Rolfe Barn, and that's pretty special to Concord people, because if you remember, that almost went up for development a number of years ago. I give a lot of credit to Larry Langlois, who is the pharmacist in Pennacook, who led a kind of a citizen group on preserving that. And that's special in Concord's history. It was one of the outermost farms in early Concord. And I want you to note the architecture, because I'm going to talk about barns a little bit later on. But this barn, the yellow barn, the Rolfe Barn, is what we call a double English. And we think it was built as a double English, and that's unusual. That's a sign of a prosperous farm. Most English barns were single, they were small, and they had the door in the middle under the eaves, a cow stable on one side, hay mow on the other, and then they often would add to them by either moving a barn on rollers, because these barns were so tightly put together, you could actually move them on rollers, or they would take them apart and put them back together again. But all indications are, when we look inside, we think this was built as a double English from the beginning, and I've seen very few of those. And Sherry Morrill's here tonight, and they live at the Timothy Walker place, and that was another early farm family, and I understand Timothy Walker was actually more a minister, and it was some of his relatives after that were more into farming. But another kind of landmark agricultural place in Concord. One of the older barns there shows there, and then a newer barn, the Gambrel out back, and now the Morrells farm, those meadows down there. But these, when I think of Concord history and early agriculture, these two usually come to mind. And like I say, take note of that English barn, because we'll talk about other barn styles later. Well, the first real big commercial agricultural thing in New Hampshire was the sheep boom. These other things were subsistence agriculture. The farmers made enough to sell a little butter and go to the general store and buy their sugar and their spices and things. But everybody kind of grew their food. And the sheep boom was a big commercial thing. It hit New Hampshire and all of New England, 1810 to 1840. And it's hard to even fathom the impact this had and the size that this was. It was just a super big thing that occurred in that time in history. Now, we often say today that everything we do is globally influenced, and everything, in Europe affects us and vice versa. You don't think of that in the 1810. But this was a case where the Napoleonic Wars led to the release of the Merino sheep out of Portugal, because the Portuguese had a very tight grip on the Merino breed, and it was a very favorable breed, very good wool, long strands, high fiber, good quality, everything, and they had that to themselves. Well, Napoleon defeated them, and it just happened that William Jarvis was the American consul to Portugal, and he had a farm in Wethersfield, Vermont, and I think he also had some connections in Claremont, because I know there's a Jarvis Hill, there's a Jarvis Estate, and so forth. But he had kind of an inside track, being the consul, on the sheep, and in fact, I heard that he and a friend actually I think they brought almost 15,000 total to New England, but he brought 4,000 to his farm in Vermont, and they just started multiplying. And it's hard to fathom how this industry grew so big, so fast. But sheep tend to have twins. So 4,000 turns to 8,000, 8,000 turns to 16,000, 16,000 turns to 32,000. So you can kind of see how the mathematics work. And of course there were some sheep here before, they probably interbreed and so forth. The other thing that made this favorable was that U.S. had imposed a tariff on English goods, so they weren't interfering. And then a population of this Merino breed just took off through the Northeast region. And in the 1840s, there were more than 600,000 sheep in New Hampshire. And it's just hard to fathom. Now, I never really had good statistics on Concord, so I reached out to Steve Taylor, a former Commissioner of Agriculture, and he actually has a chart of the different towns. And Concord had 3,600 sheep during the boom. And just to put it in perspective, Walpole had the most. They had about 14,000. Lebanon had 12,000. And our town in Bosquen had 9,000. So you weren't a big sheep thing, but still, that's quite a few. And today, I looked up these statistics, and in all of New Hampshire, we have between 7,000 and 8,000 sheep in the whole state. That's 4-H'ers and part-timers and so forth. So Concord, at that time, had almost half the population of what is entirely in the state now in the 1840s. Now, what they did is they used the upland forest and converted it to sheep pasture. And the rocks are removed, and they made the stone walls, because about a 3-foot stone wall or a 3.5-foot is about enough to keep a sheep in. And it's hard to believe, but as you travel around Concord or any of these surrounding towns, as you see these old grown-up stone walls, that means that was one time an open field used for agriculture. I went up and took this picture a few weeks ago on West Parish Road. I just snapped a picture out in the woods, and you can go to Canterbury, you can go to Loudon, you can go anywhere, and there's thousands of miles of stone walls. And so wherever you see a stone wall, that means that was farmed. Farmers tilled it, they took the stone out, they built the fences, and sheep are grazing there. And it was the sheep boom that got this going. And so these forests are now grown up, but in 1840, by then there was an oversupply of wool, and then this whole sheep boom just crashed. But they said that at the time of this boom, 75% of the state was open. It's almost reverse of today. In fact, I've seen early photos of New Hampshire, and it almost looks like what you see of photos of Ireland. All these big open pastures and stone walls, and that's what New Hampshire looked like. So that was the sheep boom, but it crashed 1840, and that's what precipitated all these woolen mills growing up. And that's another whole phase of this. It's another amazing thing. When you think of all these woolen mills in all these little towns in Manchester and everywhere else, they were responding to that demand of all this wool that needed to be processed. So it crashed, and then we get, the Civil War times and so forth, and as time moved on, the farmers became part of the Industrial Revolution. The moldboard plow, the iron point plow, was a big deal when that came about. The mowing machine, we take that for granted, but these big fields we see around Concord, they used to line up about 5 guys in a row, and they'd stagger them off starting, working down the field, mowing with a scythe, and they'd work their way down the field, work their way back, and that's how these fields were mowed. And they took a lot of pride in their mowing. And now New Hampshire has kept that skill alive a little bit. I used to run the New Hampshire scythe mowing contest in Sullivan County. It was part of the DHIA, the Dairy Herd Improvement Association summer picnic. And these guys were really fussy. The old timers were there. And one year, 1984, I remember this distinctly, I was running it, and I showed up in Claremont at a farm on an early foggy morning, and this gigantic motorized van with a CBS eye on it. And I walked up there, and the guy comes out and says, "Hi, I'm Charles Carroll, and I'm from CBS News." I said, "Okay." And he said, "I'm here to film your scythe mowing contest." So he did, and 3 days later, we were the last 5-minute section on Walter Cronkite, just before he said, "And that's the way it is." So the Sullivan County scythe mowing contest was on Walter Cronkite, part of Charles Carroll. But these guys used these blades. In fact, our farm, we had some stashed away in a basement to these guys as they got older, the old blades. And they would sharpen them up, and they'd wear them way down. A scythe blade would start out 2.5, 3 inches wide, and these old discarded ones were like, that's an inch or so wide. And they'd keep filing and filing them. So anyways, the mowing machine, that was a really big deal. And then the mowing machine, it led to other harvesting, like wheat harvesting, and then combine and all that sort of thing. And then something as simple as the hay fork. That came around the 1860s or so. There was a company, the Loudon Hay Fork Company, and they manufactured these. And the hay fork, because you'd have a track in the peak of the barn, and you'd pull it with a rope with a horse outdoors, and you'd latch onto a lot of hay in the wagon, have the horse pull ahead, and it would pull it up and go down the track. And then the workmen would say, "Okay, release it," and they'd drop it. And that was a big labor-saving device versus pitching it all up with a fork. So all these things started coming around, and farming no longer was just a subsistence type of agriculture. And farmers, being creative as they are, they kind of migrated from the sheep industry to dairy. And what they did, they sort of abandoned some of the upper pastures, because the sheep could handle things that cows couldn't. But cows kind of replaced what the sheep were doing, and the cows started to increase and so forth. And so dairy farming kind of filled that gap. There's the next big commercial industry that kind of slid in when the sheep industry went out. And this is why I want you to notice barn styles, because now I'm showing you another barn style, and this is familiar in Concord, Diamond Hill Farm. This is the Yankee barn style. And this came about in the 1850s. So the English barn was really, well, from the 1800s to 1830, 1840 or so, but 1850 or thereabouts, we started building the Yankee barn. And it was kind of Yankee ingenuity. Because our forefathers said, why are we building these little English barns with the doors under the eaves, and all the snow collects, and a low-pitch roof, it doesn't shed the snow, and then they're hard to add on to, because when you add that second barn on, your stable was a long ways away. So around 1850, these came in, and 1850 had to be the heyday of New Hampshire agriculture. And they said agriculture was really profitable in that time. And these Yankee barns went up all over New Hampshire and all over New England. And that became the style. So you had the pitch roof, the door on the end, and then the good thing about them, they were easy to add on to, because you could just keep adding bays on, and your stable would sit in a straight line. So this is Diamond Hill Farm, which now you know for vegetables and things, but they were a dairy farm over the years. And this was typical of the type of farming that was going on when these farms expanded out of that English-style barn. And inside, you'd see these stanchions. This doesn't have to be the inside of this barn because they've removed them for the farm stand, but there'd be stanchions, and typically a farmer would milk 6 or 8 cows, and the reason that's kind of a magic number, that's about what a fella could milk at a sitting. I mean, you milk 6 or 8 cows, you know why these guys had a wicked handshake. You know, that was hard work. So 6 or 8 was kind of the number. Then you wonder why they had 5 kids. Well, the more kids, the more cows. And so they were milked by hand, the Yankee barn, and dairying started to grow in New England and in Concord. Now, Jim got all excited about my milk bottle book, and this was published in New Hampshire, and I looked up, and in Concord, around the late 1900s and early 2000s, there were 110 separate milk bottle labels, and it represented 50 to 60 different farms and processors. And so I've got one over here, and they would put their name on it. In fact, I think it was required they put their name on it because they wanted to track down whose milk it was and so forth. And they would have a cap. Usually the farm name was on the cap. And so there were 100 and something of these individual labeled bottles just in Concord. And then you try to imagine these 50 or 60 farms. But I was thinking about it, if you kind of follow the perimeter of Concord, if you start, say, in Pennacook area, you know, because you got the prison farm and the Morals, that land, and then you kind of work your way around. You got Mountain Road, and that's some beautiful farm country down through Mountain Road. You had the Blood Farm and the Smiths, Bly's and so forth. There are different ones there. Then you kind of get up to the Heights, and that's not as good as land, but you go on Josiah Bartlett Road. You've got the Bartletts, and there were some other farms there. And then you kind of shift over to Manchester Street. Garvin's Falls had a few things. Then you shift over to Clinton Street. Some more beautiful land. I remember even myself coming to Concord in the 70s, the big Stilson barn that was still on Clinton Street. And there were other farms down on Clinton Street. And then you kind of work your way around, and you're up on District 5 Road and the Rosses. Then you got West Parish. West Parish had quite a number of farms. That's quite a farming area there. In fact, as you ride around Concord and you see this Yankee-style barn, that probably means that was a dairy farm, because almost every barn had 5 or 6 cows. If they had a barn, usually they had some cows, because the cows produced the milk they could make into butter and other cash crops. And so that was kind of a steady income, because sheep, you got income in the spring when you sold the lamb, or when you got the wool, and then in the fall when you sold the meat lambs. Dairy was quite a breakthrough, because now you got to check twice a month. Historically, dairy farmers had gotten paid somewhere around the 5th and the 25th of the month. I mean, 2 checks a month. I mean, that was really something over sheep farming. So all these little creameries started popping up, and they weren't just creameries. The farmers themselves were bottling their own milk, and often it was raw milk. That bottle says it says right on it, raw or pasteurized. He did both. A lot of them just bottled their own raw milk. And some of you have heard the name Red Eastman. He was well known in Concord in the baseball leagues, and he ran Eastman's Dairy on Spring Street, and I think the sign is still over the garage for that dairy. And there were several like him. I think there were Bullards, and there was another Morrill family. There were several that were doing the processing in addition to the farmers who were doing their own processing. And they delivered around Concord, and the door-to-door delivery that we're familiar with. Well, as farms grew and pasteurization became required, it was harder to justify that kind of equipment. So they started looking at making cooperatives and getting together to buy that expensive equipment. And in Concord, the big thing was the Concord Dairy Company. And a whole bunch of farmers got together, kind of formed a co-op, and bottled milk and met the pasteurization requirements. In fact, I want to thank the Hood Company. They let me have these pictures. The fleet of trucks. Then the truck on the right, I can't see the insignia on it, but I'm almost sure it's probably a Divco. Divco kind of had the corner on milk trucks. They made the step side truck that exited on the sidewalk side and put the milk in the back. And so a very high percent of the milk delivery trucks were Divcos. And so Concord Dairy started out up on 84 Washington Street in Concord in 1921. And then it moved to 328 North State Street in 1951. And then in 1971, the Weeks Dairy of Laconia merged with Concord Dairy, formed Weeks Concord. In 88, it was sold to Crowley, and then it was purchased by Hood in 2004. So a lot of our Concord farmers were core starters of that original Concord Dairy. In fact, I'm sure like Morrells and Bartlett's, all these folks were shareholders in that, and they were cooperative people that got together and started that, and they eventually sold their shares, and then Jack Weeks took it over and merged the two, and then he eventually sold out, and it became the large Weeks Dairy that it is today. Now in Concord, just to kind of finish the story, basically just two remaining dairy farms. After having 50 in the early 1900s, we've got the Morrells, and like I say, Sherry is here from the Morrell farm in Pennacook, and then the Bartletts, and I've even heard the Bartletts are reducing down, so I'm not sure how much longer they'll be shipping. But anyways, they're the two operating farms in Concord. The Morrell farm is an example of a freestall barn. And with theirs, the cows can roam free, they're free to go to eat anytime, and they're milked in a parlor. The Bartlett farm is what we call a tie stall barn. And this came about around the 1940s when the public health requirements required that cows be milked on a concrete floor. This gambrel style became popular, and so the entire floor is concrete with the cows hitched in double rows. And then by this time, balers were starting to come around, and so now we had the baled hay stored up on the second floor. Okay, the poultry industry. We can't overlook that. In the 1940s, New Hampshire was nationally known for poultry. And they had millions of birds, and one reason it was kind of spurred on by the Hubbard farm. And that was in Walpole, New Hampshire. Two brothers went to UNH, got their degrees in poultry science, started this poultry breeding operation in Walpole, which became a huge company, which now has been bought out by a national firm and so forth. But they contract raised a lot of hens around the state. So that's what spurred on a lot of this industry. They were kind of supporting some of this on their contracts. And so a lot of it was egg laying, there was some meat birds, and then there was a lot done with hatchery. This picture was on my lead slide. This is the Murray farm on River Road in Pennacook. They had a huge hatchery. Dave Murray can tell you stories of delivering chickens all over the county, really, from that farm. And I listed a few here just because I had it in the book, and I just thought it was impressive. And some of these may ring a bell. There's a H.W. Ford, Daniel Graham, Joseph Jaworski, which I personally knew, Harry Jones, Joseph Moody, Gordon Osborne, Herbert Piper, Abbott Presby. Now that's Jane Presby's dad at Diamond Hill Farm. L. E. Sanborn, Larry Ufford, and then Roy Blake had the turkeys. And that's just in Concord, just the poultry industry. And this was multiplied all over the state. And it's evidenced by these old rundown poultry farms that you see in almost all the countryside. They tended not to be well built because chickens are small and so forth. But some of the old cow barns were converted, and you can tell if they converted a cow barn because they put a lot of windows on the south side. And normally a cow barn wouldn't have windows in the haymow because it bleaches the hay. Okay, fruit farming. I just want to touch on these because Concord had all of these. And like I say, they had to be kind of self-sufficient for their supply. So Concord had apple orchards on the hillsides to take advantage of the the wind currents and the sun exposure. Farnham Orchard was well known on Carter Hill, which is now Carter Hill Orchard. And now we know we have Apple Hill Orchard off of Mountain Road. But there are several of these orchards, generally on hillsides, and it was pretty much a wholesale type business. Their extra apples often went into Massachusetts for apple juice. There was a big company down there that took their excess apples. And now, to be competitive, most of our apple business is doing retail, to try to get the whole dollar from the consumer. But Concord had its share of these orchards. Okay, and vegetable farming. I just want to touch these just briefly, just different ones. This is a picture of the postal workers that after hours, they worked on the potato ground, and that was out on Ironworks Road, and it was part of the City Garden Project. It was around the World War I time, and they were promoting Victory Gardens and different things, and postal workers helped out growing potatoes. Then you get in the 50s and the 60s, and you had the box stores coming in, and they kind of exceeded what these local farmers could supply. And that kind of hurt our local folks. But then we had another thing come around with the interest in local, and in 1981 on North State Street, you had the farmers market, and that kind of created a little bit of regeneration. And now there's a lot of interest in local food. Even your big box stores kind of pride themselves with a little corner of local because people are looking for it. And then there were a lot of greenhouse businesses too. I just listed a couple. I mentioned Murray's now is a greenhouse. You had McLeod's, and there was Knollcrest on the Heights, and Rufo's. There were a number of greenhouses dotted around. So it had its share in the horticultural industry as well. Now horses. Now, of course, and originally in Concord's history, the horses were a means of transportation. And people had driving horses for transportation. In fact, a lot of your in-town homes that have a little, like it looks like a one-car garage out back, was probably what I call a village barn. And they would have their family cow and usually a driving horse and a spot to hook their wagon. And up on, this is Greenwich Street on Airport Road, there was a boarding and training, an equestrian instruction school. And I've read there were several places dotted around the city. Now, I also read that a lot of the hotels at different places had liveries. And just a few weeks ago, I went kind of rummaging around behind the Eagle Hotel, and I'm pretty sure I've located the windows of the stables for the livery that went with the Eagle Hotel. Because I've read about it in the literature, and I'm just guessing from the way it looks, because a horse stable is identified by narrow windows high up, because horse is what they call crib. They tend to chew on the wood and stuff, so they tend to have little windows high up with some iron grates in front of it. So I'm kind of guessing, but I'm pretty sure when I snapped this picture, I just snapped this a couple weeks ago, that this is probably some of the stable area that accompanied the Eagle Hotel. And there were other examples of those dotted all over the city. And people would get fresh horses, or they would have their horse stay there while they were visiting and so forth. Okay, livestock, I want to cover, I'm kind of a dairy guy. Since I'm kind of biased on the dairy section, I'm a dairy guy, but I want to give everybody equal time. So livestock, pigs were important in early Concord. They were the waste disposal system. And there were a number of pig farms. And I put the numbers on a few of those just to give you an idea, but there was garbage feeding. And they included James Clattenburg, he had 200 or 300. Now, when you say 200 or 300, that doesn't necessarily mean that was all mature ones, because see, pigs have 8 or 10 per litter. So that might mean 80, 90 mature ones and a whole bunch of little ones. I can't separate that out from the statistics. But anyways, there were that many pigs on the place. A state prison farm, a state hospital farm, they had 300, St. Paul's. And then Martin White lived up on Fisk Road, and he had a number of hogs. And so in 1923, there were 21 hog farmers that were licensed, and to feed garbage, you had to cook the garbage. So a lot of these people had like an outdoor arch with like concrete blocks of brick, and iron things across it in pans, and they put the garbage in they got from the restaurants and so forth, and they'd cook it, and then you'd slop it out with buckets and feed the pigs, and then you'd buy grain in addition to get the nutrients, because garbage wouldn't be a whole food. But around the 1920s, there started to be a decrease in hog production in Concord, and there are notes in the city reports that the public health people were scrambling for garbage disposal and actually paid some of these people extra to do it, then actually started some garbage collection because they didn't have enough pigs to take care of it. So the pigs were real important in early Concord for waste handling. And then beef were raised in Concord. Devon was a popular breed. That's an old-time red breed. Some people had dual-purpose milking shorthorn. Later we had Herefords. Some of you may remember the name Dister Diaz. He was the last person in Concord raising beef within the city limits, right up on Hutchins. Yeah, Hutchins, 30 Hutchins Street. I knew him. He was a military man. He retired from the military and raised his beef. So Concord had the representation of all these different parts of agriculture, and they were part of their food system. Now, being a capital city and centrally located and good road system and the way things intersect, it's also been known for its agricultural services. And a lot of farmers from around the area would look to Concord for getting things. And I took this picture just a couple of weeks ago. The sign is still on the building for Thompson and Hogue Agricultural Warehouse. It said they handled a lot of farm things, tools, forks, shovels, baskets, all that kind of things that farmers need. And then we don't want to forget Merrimack Feeds. And that was, again, another cooperative. And we had that grain sack hanging around at home as a remembrance of Merrimack farmers. And the guy who kind of got this going was quite a mover and shaker in this area. His name was George Putnam. In fact, he's the one that kind of got Farm Bureau going. And so he started Merrimack Farmers Exchange as a cooperative, and farmers paid in pretty large sums of money if they wanted to join, to be a stockholder, but anybody could buy there. And it was more than just grain. They started out, as it says, down in Low Avenue, and then it allowed them to operate out of the railroad cars, so they didn't have much of a warehouse. They were literally selling grain right out of the boxcars. In fact, I remember as a kid up in Lebanon, we used to buy our grain over in White River, and we'd pull up to a guy in his car with a clipboard, and he would check off the number of bags we wanted, and we'd go to the railroad car, load them into the truck, and these are when men were men. These are 100-pound bags. I remember lugging 100-pound bags at home, lugging them into the grain room, and so Merrimack Farmers operated this way. They operated out of the railroad yards, a very small depot there, and a few services. In fact, I read that after World War II, there was quite an interest in tractors, and metal became more available, and mechanization more available. Merrimack Farmers took orders for tractors and brought in several flatbed cars loaded with tractors. They said it was a great line, and all the farmers all had their pre-paid tractor on the flatbed. So they did a lot for farmers. And it was more than just grain. I remember when they ran a milking repair supply service for farmers. They'd go out and fix your milking machine, sell you parts for your milking machine. Anything you could think of on a farm, they handled. They had some of those big warehouses that Pitco has now. That was all Merrimack Farmers. So they had a fire at the new mill. They moved to the new mill in 1940 in Bow, burned in 63, and then they replaced it with that new mill, you see. So we think of Merrimack Farmers as Bow, but that really had its start in Concord. And then, being the capital city, it was also a center of agricultural activities. Now, I started in cooperative extension 1974, and then extension had historically been a Concord city office. In fact, I started out in extension in what we call the old federal building now, which is the James Cleveland building. I was up on, I think, the third floor of that building. And then we moved to, I think, North Main Street under the county courthouse area. Then we went to Green Street, and then we got moved up to the county home. We figured that was our final resting place, and it has been. But we're at the county home, package deal, and so Extension's there. So Extension was a very much part of the Concord agricultural scene, and like I say, I was part of that. But I don't know how many of you have heard about the Concord State Fair. And that was new to me when I was doing my research, and it was quite a thing. It was up on Clinton Street, kind of in the vicinity of the Mormon church, I think, and the old Stilson farm up in that area. And you can see it had a grandstand that held 3,000 people, stables that held 500 head of cattle and livestock and horses. Now it started around 1900, and I wonder if it might be related. Governor Rawlins established Old Home Day in about 1899, and I don't know if that had some of the thinking of bringing people together. Coincidentally, that kind of got started around that time, but around 1900 it started, and it kind of fizzled out at World War I. There's not really good records about it. It just seems like at World War I, a lot of things ceased, because of the war. And I read some annual reports a few years after. They used to have board meetings, but nothing really happened. And I don't know if the buildings burned, torn down, or whatever, but anyways, for 15 or 16 years, you had the Concord State Fair on Clinton Street. And then you had a lot of agricultural shows. And the Concord Armory, now that's actually behind City Hall, isn't it? The Concord Armory? Okay, that's not the big armory up on the heights. And they apparently were a site for a lot of agricultural things. This is an example in 1928 of the State Apple Show. I've read records about a state butter show, a cheese show, a lot of agricultural things. And like I say, they tended to be in Concord because being the capital city, the good transportation, roads, and that kind of thing, a lot of these things occurred there. Now this probably brings back memories, the Highway Hotel. Now the Eagle Hotel had the early reputation of sort of being where a lot of legislation took place. All these little caucuses were in the Eagle Hotel across from the State House. And then later, I think the Highway Hotel kind of had the same reputation. The legislators would stay overnight there, and then at night they'd be caucusing, and they always said a lot of legislation happened at the Highway Hotel. Well, a lot of farm things happened both at the Eagle Hotel and the Highway Hotel. In fact, New Hampshire Farm Bureau got started. There was a meeting at the Eagle Hotel, and again, George Putnam was there. He was leading the charge on starting the Farm Bureau. And Farm Bureau was started around 1915, officially called Farm Bureau in the 1923, I think. It just happens my great uncle, John Daniel Porter, was the first Farm Bureau county president in New Hampshire. Sullivan County was the first county to adopt the Farm Bureau Code of Ethics and rules and regulations and bylaws. So the first Farm Bureau was started in Sullivan County around 1915, and my great uncle, J. Daniel Porter, he was one of the early porters that went to college. He went to Dartmouth. He was a kid, he grew up, our family settled Plainfield, that's where I'm from. And so all my relatives, I'm the first generation not to go to Kimball Union Academy because all the townies went to Kimball Union free because there was no high school. So my great uncle is this hayseed kid off the farm going with all these rich kids to Kimball Union Academy, graduated valedictorian. He got free tuition to Dartmouth. So my great uncle went to Dartmouth, and then he became Farm Bureau president, served in the legislature under Powell and so forth. So anyways, a lot of neat things happened in these old buildings. Other things at the Highway Hotel, I mentioned the Farm Bureau, New Hampshire Dairy Improvement Association, that's DHIA, that's the record-keeping system for keeping track of milk records. I know the state meetings were held there, county meetings were held there. And then you had the New Hampshire Dairy Management Conferences. And the Highway Hotel had a famous noontime buffet. In fact, being kind of a young guy and arriving on my job I discovered I got quite a reputation for really loading up my plate at the Highway Hotel. I heard one farmer kind of over say, boy, that John Porter can sure eat. So I guess I got a little bit of a reputation at the Highway Hotel buffet. But that was always served at noontime, and so we'd have our farm meetings there upstairs. We had the blue room and the different color rooms up there. And then we'd come down for that Highway Hotel lunch, and so a lot of things were held there. Granite State Dairyman, again, that kind of had its roots back at the Eagle Hotel. Granite State Dairyman started in 1884 in Concord and was the longest continuous running dairy organization in the United States until it dissolved in the mid-1980s and kind of merged into Granite State Dairy Promotion. But this was a well-known lobbying group. They lobbied for rural electricity, state police protection outside of city limits. I mean, all kinds of things that they lobbied for, and they brought in national speakers. I read where they had meetings attended by 500 people, 500 farmers attending a meeting in northern New Hampshire sponsored by Granite State Dairymen. So I used to attend that. Like I say, it phased out, but it was a very active, very strong, and a nationally recognized group. And then milk marketing. There was a lot of different things. There was the Dairy Compact was something very special to farmers that was done a few years ago for milk marketing. A lot of those negotiations happened at the Highway Hotel. We would have different meetings about milk marketing orders and so forth. So I've only been around since '74, but I just remember a lot of things happening there. And like I say, even back into the Eagle Hotel, Concord was kind of a little bit of a magnet for these statewide things. And that's it. Thank you. I got to show you all my discrimination clauses so I don't get arrested. Okay, now I'm official. Okay, let's do questions. I try to keep it within the time so we could do questions. Yes?
I know where the Rolf barn is. Where is the Walker barn? In your first,
Right down the road.
That's the next place down the road.
Last house on North Main Street.
oh, right before the Pierce?
Yep, on the right.
I thought it looks familiar.
So that's where Sherry and Rob Morrow live now, and they're maintaining that place historically. That's nice. Okay, another question. Come on, something I didn't cover.
Can I add a few things?
Yeah,
about
please.
farmer history? So like John said about we own the old Walker farm and the fields out there on Horseshoe Pond. So there's about 110 acres of tillable land there. But all of that land was not originally part of the Walker farm. If you lived on North State Street, quite a ways up, or here on North Main Street, along with your house that you had here, you had a plot on what we call it the island. So you had a plot on the island, and over the years, as people said, you know, we don't need that plot for our garden or whatever, the Walker family bought those plots, and that's how they amassed that whole piece of property.
And that was common in a lot of towns. I know Bosquen, I think those meadows were the same way. I think there were town boundaries that went down to the meadows. Because thank you for adding that. I don't know if you heard that, but Sherry said that those fields that are down off from the Walker place, we used to connect, up to people on State Street, and they would go down and they'd have meadow land going with their places. And then they finally got put together. Okay, something else. Yes?
Is the Future Farmers of America still an active group?
It is.
Because what I remember from high school, like that Highway Hotel, the Future Teachers of America that would come out to there, or the Future Farmers would come and gather. Is that still going?
It is, very active. In fact, they don't technically call them, they just call themselves FFA.
Oh, they do.
They sort of took the initials out. They just use the initials, but it's very active.
Okay.
They call them the purple coats, I guess. They all are known for wearing their coats at the conventions. Sue and I have been attending their annual meeting the last 2 years up at the Grandview Hotel.
Oh.
And it is just encouraging to see such good young people, polite. They speak to you on the sidewalk. They open the door for you. They give speeches. They have clear speeches. And they have national conferences in the Midwest of over 20 and 30,000 in attendance. They take over whole cities just about. So no, very active. It's a limited number of schools. It depends if the school has a VOAG program. So some kids actually take a bus, like to go to Winnisquam or something, because I don't think Merrimack Valley has it, but their kids go to Winnisquam. Co-Brown has it. So it's a limited number of schools that offer it, but any kid can go if they want to and can be transported to that program. But very active and some nice kids. Yes?
How many dairy farms are left in New Hampshire?
Well, you know, we have lost a lot of dairy farms. When I started working in Extension, 1974, I think we were pushing 700 or 800 dairy farms. And today, you've got to exaggerate to say we have 80. That's pushing it. You're almost exaggerating to say 80. It's probably 75. But we've gone, in fact, I found some census data from 1900 that said there were 10,000 dairy farms in New Hampshire. That accounted just about everybody, because a lot of people had 1 or 2 cows. But this is why I'm saying, a lot of these old barns, every barn you see in New Hampshire would have had cows in it. And we estimate there are over 20,000 of these old barns in New Hampshire. So that kind of correlates with that statistic. But anyways, we're down to 80 farms. Our cow numbers are still fairly decent, and we still ship a lot of milk because the cows we have are producing more and the farms are larger. I mean, years ago, a farm was 6 or 8 or 10. Farms expanded in the 1930s because the milking machine came about and electricity, and that's what caused farms to grow. So now in New Hampshire, our farm size averages, I think it's over 150 or something, and our largest farm is about 1,200 milking, and the Morals are kind of in the average. They're milking 130, 140. But no, we've lost a lot of farms. The big drain started around 1984 with the USDA dairy buyout. There was a surplus of milk, and the government, in its semi-infinite wisdom, had a universal thing that all cows would be eliminated or reduced in all states, even though New Hampshire didn't need to reduce. So we lost a lot of farms to that buyout program, and we never really bounced back. And of course, urban development, all these things are pressures that push them out, and the margins have been very tight. It's been a very tight, there have been a lot of up and down years. Thank you for asking that. I should have mentioned that. Yes?
Where is that largest dairy farm in the state?
That's in Lancaster, New Hampshire. It's the Forbes farm. They milk over 1,200. It's 2 brothers, and I think they're the largest employer in the town of Lancaster. I think they have 30 or 40 employees. They're one of the largest employers. They're very well known up there and run a very large, nice farm operation. Yes?
Besides Hood, are there other brands coming out of that North State Street plant that I would recognize in the dairy section of my supermarket?
I know Sherry might know. There used to be a time they bottled for others. Are they doing that now?
The Hood plant here in Concord bottles for Market Basket.
The store brand.
The Market Basket store brand, yes. I think that's the only one they're bottling for
Okay.
right now.
Now, there is a
And
promotion.
ice cream, they do ice cream there. Do they do?
No,
can't-
they
don't?
shut down the ice
They just do
cream.
milk?
They just process
Yeah,
milk.
the old Weeks did ice cream. You know, the Weeks Dairy, they did ice cream, Concord Dairy, but not now. And there's a new promotion program going on that the dairy farmers are paying for. It's called Checking Your Milk Jugs, and trying to get people to buy jugs that have number 33 on it. 33 is the state code. And so people say, well, I want to buy local and so forth. Well, some of that Market Basket stuff is local, but if you find the 33 on it, that means it was bottled in New Hampshire. And then there are other New England numbers if you want to at least stay in New England. But we're really pushing, look for 33 if you want to buy local milk in the store. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you tell us something about the New Hampshire hospital farms?
Well, the New Hampshire Hospital Farm was on Clinton Street, and it was common for the county farms, the hospital farms, and a lot of these group places to have a dairy herd, and it was because of the concern about TB and underlant fever coming through raw milk that a lot of these institutions had their own dairy farms and kept very strict sanitary rules because they were concerned about the health of their group population. So the state, there was, the prison had a farm, Merrimack County Home had a farm, and at the hospital farm, because they had cows for milk, they had pigs, and it was to be, originally, it was self-sufficient, and then toward the end, I think all these farms, because of all the regulations, they couldn't afford to pasteurize and do all the other things that had to come along to meet standards, and they just ship milk regular. So there's only one county farm shipping milk in New Hampshire left, and that's Grafton County Farm. But there used to be every county farm had a dairy herd, and a lot of the institutionals had dairy herd, but it was for the milk quality. In fact, even a lot of your boys and girls camps, if you go up in Moultonborough, there are a lot of camps up there. There are nice, fancy little barns there that had little cow stables, and they made their own milk for their camp. So it related to the public health concerns. Anything else? Come on, you got to stump the dairy guy here. Let's have another question. Just mention, if you're into this kind of thing, authors always have to brag about their books. And I did write a book about the New Hampshire dairy industry that's available. We wrote a supplement that goes with it. And then I wrote the book about preserving old barns. If you really want to get into barns in more detail, this is $30, and this is $20 with a supplement. And I give the barn lectures in cooperation with the New Hampshire Humanities Council. So they sponsor me at historical societies, and I go all over the state doing those lectures if you have an interest in old barns. So I think Jim is giving me the high sign, so thank you very much.
Hey.
Thank you.
Oh, and the Historical Society book, which is here, is hardcover, and we call it our keepsake edition, and it's $50. And that's a markdown, actually, from $100 at one point. And we haven't here. But this was fascinating, and I've enjoyed every minute of what you've had here this evening. And I grew up in Concord and recognize so many of the different things that he has told us. So, John, thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
Very,
Jennifer
very
kind of got me into this.
Next
I'm
month,
shocked, right?
well, two things are happening next month. We're back here on the second Thursday. But we also have something going on October 4th. And
October 4th.
would you tell us more about that?
Sure. Last year we did Ghost Stories, and it was a downtown tour with In Town Concord, a co-sponsored event. And we basically ran around the downtown for about an hour and a half, 2 times over. It was a trek. That's what I'm going to say. This year we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to tell campfire stories in Eagle Square, so it'll be a lot less running around. We'll all kind of sit. We're going to have a great time in the built-in studio or theater, amphitheater that they have there at Eagle Square. We do have a special surprise. It is very kid-friendly. So we're going to do this twice. It'll start 5:30 at the first time. We'll run about an hour. That'll be very appropriate for kids 6 years and in that age group. Over 10, come at 7 o'clock. We'll tell a little bit more of the spookier kind of ghosty stories. It is October after all. And Josh Begin is a local acoustic guitar player. So he's going to come and sing campfire songs for us too. So it's a sing-along. Cannot keep your voice silent because it's supposed to be fun. I think he'll do some stuff for the kids. We'll also do some classics we all like to sing along. It'll be a great October evening. I've already put in the request for no rain because we can't have that. And again, because it's October, it's a great time to just sit around. We'll do something different, and it'll be the first time we light a fire in a long time in Eagle Square anyway. And so that's our plan. Our second Thursday of the month, we are still working on our speaker. It is Archivist Awareness Month. So if you know a local historic archivist, be sure to send them cards and flowers, all that good stuff.
Yes.
That's what I have for you.
So that's it. Any questions about what's coming up ahead? And if you have any ideas or things that you think that would be of great interest to you, we're very interested in providing anything that relates to Concord and our history, and there may be something of special interest to you that if it is, others will be just as interested. For example, just right off the top of my head, I think of the automobile industry in Concord. And I bet a nickel I could get Amanda Grignani to come and do her presentation on automobile industry. And it's just an idea, right off the top of your head. If you come up with one, please let me know. Other than that, thank you very much for coming tonight. We appreciate donations, and we would love to have you buy our book.